Good afternoon to our viewers in Germany and good morning to our viewers in the United States. Hello, I'm Steve Sokol, the president of the American Council on Germany, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's Kaffeepause. This is our regular check-in with a journalist based in Berlin to talk about the news stories behind the headlines. And today we're joined by Nette Nöstlinger. She's a politics reporter for Politico and based in Berlin. Nette, herzlich willkommen. It's great to see you.
Dankeschön. It's great to be here.
So the question that I always like to start the Kaffeepause with is sort of what's the current mood in Berlin? Was ist das Stimmungsbild in Berlin? Can you tell us sort of what you're picking up that we might not be able to see as we read the newspapers or listen to the radio or watch television? What are you picking up as you're out and about?
I think in general, the mood is quite good. Although I also have to say, I really feel like we're still in this kind of wait and see moment. Like the new German government hasn't been in office that long. And I think Friedrich Merz, the new German chancellor, has made a lot of promises. He said he would reform the country. He has promised, like, when it comes to foreign policy, a lot of stuff, but also when it comes to domestic policy. So I think people are just waiting to see if he can actually deliver. People are also waiting to see how the AfD is going to react, if he will be able to lower the popularity rating of the far right AfD party in Germany. And then also, what is also still a question we are looking at and people are wondering about, I think, is how is the coalition going to work together? Is there going to be disunity or unity? The first day as chancellor for Friedrich Merz was a bit awkward because he didn't get elected by the Bundestag immediately, and this never happened in modern German history. So this kind of signaled that maybe his coalition was not so united as we thought they would be. So yeah, this is something we need to look at when, for example, when it comes to big Bundestag votes, can he pass the bills he has promised to pass, for example?
Mhm. So obviously, lots of unknowns and uncertainty at the moment as we try to understand the contours of the new government. And maybe that's a good place to start. You mentioned that Friedrich Merz made lots of promises, both in terms of domestic issues and in terms of foreign policy. Let's take each of those in turn. What are Friedrich Merz's domestic priorities?
Yeah, he has two main domestic priorities. One is to get the economy going again. The German economy is struggling. There have been two recessions in a row, 2024 and 2023, and this year the expectation is zero growth. So, of course, we will see how that develops. Although the German government is pumping a lot of money into the economy, so there is this package that has been approved, which is 500 billion for infrastructure investments over the next 10 years. And then they also basically lifted the debt brake on defense spending. So they can invest a lot, but the tariffs are hurting also the German economy, which is super export oriented a lot. So basically, he needs to revamp the economy. That's also what he has promised. He has spent a decade in the private sector in business, so he has presented himself as someone who knows what he's talking about and who will be able to do that. And the second big promise is basically a crackdown on migration, to get very strict on migration, to reverse the policy of the previous government, but also of his predecessor Angela Merkel, who in 2015, 2016 had a policy of welcoming people from Syria, from Afghanistan, and so on. So these are the two domestic promises and also challenges, I think. Yeah.
So I guess, one of the questions I'd like to ask you has to do with the economy.
Mhm.
Of course, there's a new economics minister, Frau Reiche,
Yeah.
and the portfolio of the ministry has also changed a little bit
Mhm.
under the previous government. Climate was part of the responsibility of the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate. Climate has now been
Mhm.
moved out.
Yeah.
Um, what signs are you seeing from her about her ability to, help Friedrich Merz really sort of jumpstart the German economy?
Mhm. Um, Well, once again, I think it's still like a moment of suspension also when it comes to the economy ministry. I mean, we've been getting like it was kind of interesting because she's a woman that comes from private sector. I mean, she's a CDU member. She was in politics before, but she has spent now a lot of time in the private sector, in the energy sector actually. And Friedrich Merz has brought her back from a big energy company to come back to the to work for the government. Um, Her key focus really seems to be on lowering energy prices, to cap energy prices on the one hand, and to also, I mean, the German government now is saying like we the climate targets are important, we will respect them and so on, but at the same time they're saying this is not our priority anymore. We want growth first and climate basically second, and we are open-minded. We as they say in Germany, Technologie offen, which means we are not going to exclude anything. So there is a clear, I mean, especially in comparison to the previous government, where climate was such a central, yeah, kind of topic, goal, theme inside the government, we see like a huge reversal there.
Hmm. And then I guess energy and energy prices are obviously one of the key issues facing the German economy. Another one is the shortage of skilled labor, um,
Hmm.
and needing labor in any case. And of course, that's then the bridge to talking about migration. But
Hmm.
how do you see this government addressing the skilled labor shortage? Are there already some signs about how they might try to combat that?
Not that I really know of, to be honest. I mean, they are aware of the problem and they say it's something they need to tackle. When they talk about migration, they also mention labor migration, but they mention also that they really want to select themselves who comes to the country, that not everybody should maybe automatically have the right to come to Germany. We can also see that now with what is happening in the universities in the US, that, for example, the Minister of Science and Research has said today, as many European countries have said, I mean, also in France, that this is an opportunity for us to really attract skilled workers, great minds, also talented students, to give them kind of opportunities in a home in Germany, because this is something we're lacking. But I haven't seen any concrete like plans or proposals to make that work. Also, because we have seen also in the last government, although they were really open to attract skilled workers, they had like plans how they would do so. We
Hmm.
just see that the atmosphere in Germany with the AfD that's rising, and this whole, yeah, just the way people are talking about migration, that also people from other countries not necessarily feel welcome here, even if they're so-called expats instead of.
Hmm.
So this is something they also have to resolve, because they are talking. Yeah, they are being quite tough in their talk on migration, so to say.
Hmm.
So it's something they have to.
Yeah. So I'd like to talk about the AFD in just a moment, but first, sort of sticking with this migration issue, there's been some discussion by Friedrich Merz about having tighter border controls,
Mhm,
even though Germany is well within the EU and um,
mhm,
neighbored by other Schengen
mhm,
countries. How's this discussion playing out at the moment? What's sort of the response to having tighter border checks?
mhm. Yeah, this is something we looked into last week. So maybe we should go a bit back in time. So during the election campaign, there was an attack, an Islamist attack by a migrant who came to Germany. Um, he killed a small child and a man, an adult. And this attack really kind of changed the whole election campaign. It turned around the position of the parties, and this was also where Friedrich Merz stepped out and say, "Okay, when I get elected as chancellor, I will lead a crackdown on migration, and on day one in office, I will introduce border controls along all of Germany's borders." So this was a big promise he made, and one that he also lived up to. So on day one in office, his interior minister then announced that Germany would be, there were already border controls, but would be increasing the border controls and would be rejecting asylum seekers at the borders, which, according to most legal experts and also all neighboring countries, is actually illegal in the
Hmm.
EU when it comes to EU law. So this is really a big step in the sense that Germany as a country I mean, we all know that Germans are usually tend to follow the rules, and also in the EU are presenting themselves as this like responsible kind of country. So it's really a new thing or a shift that Germany now is, yeah, breaking EU rules um,
Yeah.
to get while getting tough on migration. On the other hand, I mean, we have also described in our article, and this is also what we are hearing from neighboring countries, from their ministries, from their police, that these border controls are mainly symbolic. So I mean, the EU just doesn't function like this. So, if, for example, to give a concrete example, if they stop a person at the border, they reject them, and then they'll try again. They can try as long as they want to. So, like, yeah, doesn't really seem like there's going to be a lot of changes, except for the traffic jams, which then again is hurting the economy, and which the neighboring countries really don't like to see. So, yeah.
But I think, as you said, it also has a lot to do with the symbolism, right?
Mhm.
And you've brought up the Alternative for Germany, the AfD, a couple of times. Of course, this is now the largest opposition party, and that affords the AfD certain rights.
Mhm.
One of the big issues that the AfD has on its agenda is migration and really trying to crack down on migration. And so
Mhm.
Matz has had to take that on as an important topic for him and for the Christian Democrats, but also
Yeah.
for the CDU led government. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the role that the AfD is playing? I mean, we've heard some politicians say that their strategy for dealing with the AfD is to govern better, and address the problems and concerns of the voters. But the AfD, of course, is in a much more prominent position as the largest opposition party. It has the ability to respond more directly to speeches in the Bundestag. It has the ability to chair certain committees that are fairly influential in the Bundestag. Um,
Mhm.
how's that sort of playing out as the new government and the new Bundestag sort of constitutes itself?
Mhm. Yeah. So Friedrich Merz himself has said a couple of times before the election, but also after the election as chancellor, that he feels that he has a huge responsibility on his shoulders, or he carries a huge responsibility, because if this government doesn't govern well, then the chances that the AfD will come to power in 2029, which is something they are working towards very clearly, um, yeah, it's very probable, basically. So this government sees itself, defines itself as yeah, maybe the last government before the AfD, but then again, if they govern well, they also didn't see themselves as a government that possibly could stop the rise of the AfD. So of course this makes his task more relevant in a sense, but of course it's also, yeah, a big responsibility to carry on his shoulder. Then I think the AfD has gotten to such a point that there has been really a discussion in Germany about how for example, to give them more powers in the Bundestag. But a few weeks ago, the domestic intelligence services published a new report and basically classifies them as an extremist organization, which then again, now politicians are taking more distance again, and the AfD is becoming more isolated again.
Mhm.
But I think before that report, there was like also because members of the US administration have backed the AfD, have said that they should also get more saying, that this is like the freedom of the people and that they should be respected, that the people have voted like this. And such, yeah, such tweets or such, yeah, how should I say, Äußerungen, I
Yeah,
think,
statements, comments.
statements, they they are very closely watched in Germany. So I think it was really difficult for Merz, for example, how he would react to that. So yeah, but now because of this classification of the intelligence services as extreme, like as an extremist organization, it has hurt their image a bit. But they are trying to normalize themselves to become more mainstream. they are also trying to portray Merz as somebody who is a liar, who is not honest. This is because Merz has promised some things during the election campaign, which he then broke immediately after the election. So we will see what their strategy is, yeah, going forward.
And I mean, I guess, the AFD is being watched, of course, very closely by many people here in the US, and there's a
Mhm,
sort of fascination with
mhm,
them. One of the questions that I often get when I'm out and about is why some of the politicians from the center and groups from the center don't sort of even engage AFD
mhm.
politicians in conversation and discussion, and that sort of makes the situation even more difficult. Can you sort of, I mean, you talked a little bit about how the AFD has become a little bit more isolated, particularly with this report
Mhm.
from the Office for the Protection of the Constitution
Yeah.
and the classification of the AFD as an extremist organization. But what do you see as sort of the path forward as the parties of the center really try to take the wind out of the sails of
Mhm.
the AFD?
Um, yeah, the path forward. It's. I mean, I think that the path forward, that at some point there will be engagement with the AFD in parliament. It's just like the party is getting so strong. It's the biggest opposition party in the Bundestag now, as you said. Together with the left party, they already have a blocking minority when it comes to, for example, to laws for which you need a two-third majority. So in
Mhm.
some senses, they can block important things. And if we just look at the other level, so the regional level in Germany of the states, for example, or also the Kommunalebene, so the level of the towns and the villages, then we already see that you cannot exclude the AfD anymore. Even though if they would want to do that, like we have in Germany, there is a so-called firewall or Brandmauer, which actually, or which in France would be the cordon sanitaire, so a kind of agreement between all mainstream parties to not work together with the far right.
Yeah.
But in practice, it just gets very difficult to do so because they are gaining so much power that it's difficult to keep them out.
Mhm.
But yeah, this is something we have to see how this evolves in future. Yeah.
So obviously, Friedrich Merz and his government have their hands full when it comes to domestic politics, and we haven't even
Mhm.
talked about issues like housing or energy for consumers, sort of home consumers of energy. But he also has his hands full when it comes to foreign policy and on the international stage, and I think he comes into this role being a little bit more versed in international affairs than perhaps domestic policy. He said from even before he was elected that one of his main goals was rebuilding trust in Germany, within Europe, particularly with Germany's neighbors, France and Poland. And he started to do that already. Let's talk a little bit about Friedrich Merz and Germany on the world stage. What are some of your initial sort of takeaways or insights from some of his first trips to European neighbors and some of the things that you've been hearing from him about um, Germany's Europapolitik or European policy, but then also we'll get into Ukraine and of course the transatlantic relationship as well.
Hmm. First of all, I think that other European countries seem to be very happy about Friedrich Merz taking power in Germany. That's also what we're hearing, like from other capitals, from Paris, from London, from Brussels. I think much of it has to do also with his predecessor, Olaf Scholz, who really was a bit boring, basically. Like he didn't really have the magic going for him. He was very flat, very, he didn't really say much. So Friedrich Merz in this regard is somebody who really does say things. For example,
Mhm.
I will close the borders on the first day in office, or he's a guy who makes big statements and who reverses course all of a sudden and then also makes a big announcement. He's just a bit more exciting, I think, in a way, even though, um, yeah. He's also, yeah, anyway. And then the other observation is that he has really traveled a lot. So in Germany, the press has referred to him as the Außenkanzler, so the foreign chancellor.
Hmm.
Maybe he's the chancellor who has made the most foreign trips in his first weeks in office, again, since the beginning of German modern history. So we can see that it's a top priority for him. Also, before taking up office, he already had a lot of conversations with, for example, Donald Tusk from Poland or Emmanuel Macron from France. So we could really see that the preparations had been ongoing basically, and that when he entered into office, that they could start like going into real action.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I mean, there have also been a couple of interesting sort of indications of possible policy shifts by Friedrich Merz from his predecessor, Olaf Scholz.
Mhm.
One of them is that he's been talking about increasing the threshold for German defense spending to 5% of GDP. I mean, this is something that would
Mhm.
have been unheard of
Yeah.
under Olaf Scholz. And, just in the last day or so, Friedrich Merz announced Germany's willingness to lift range restrictions on weapons being sent to Ukraine so that
Mhm.
the Ukrainian military could actually hit targets inside of Russia and not have any external limits. I mean, that's a big shift from what Olaf Scholz was talking about.
Mhm. Yeah, the 5% GDP announcement for defense spending is a very big shift. It's also something like if we talk about Germany, about German politics, we always have to keep in mind the German history, its Nazi past. It plays a role in almost all topics. Also, when it comes to the AfD, for example, why there is a Brandmauer firewall, but also in defense. So also for Friedrich Merz to announce this 5% GDP topic, for him to travel to other countries and try to defend other leaders to actually invest in their military, and to also turn up in the Bundestag, which happened, I think, last week or 2 weeks ago, and say, I want to turn the Bundeswehr, the German military, into the strongest army in Europe, is something that really constitutes a very big shift, I think, in the thinking of Germans, but also in the way they speak on the international stage, which is, of course, doesn't come out of the blue. I mean, we have seen the Zeitenwende by
Mhm.
Olaf Scholz. It all started uh, since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So we have seen in German society really a change of mindset when it comes to the army, to the military, to the Bundeswehr. But yeah, it's something that the Merz is stepping up the game, so to say. Like he's taking it more to like an international level and really taking up a leading role in that sense.
Mhm.
When it comes to the missiles for Ukraine, I have to say it. We in the office, he announced it yesterday, and we are actually trying to figure out what it actually means because he's being a bit ambiguous about what he's saying. Yesterday he made a big announcement. Today he said, it's not new, it has been in place for since a couple of months. Then the big question is, have they delivered Taurus to Ukraine? Taurus is the only German long range defense missile. So, and they are not communicating whether or not they have delivered Taurus to Ukraine. So, if there is Taurus in Ukraine now, this of course would mean a huge shift because then they can actually attack um, deep into Russia. But if there is no Taurus delivery, then in practice this also might not mean a lot. It's just
Mhm.
another form of communication. And the German government also has switched policy in the sense that the previous government always had a list online which everybody could go to, and you could see which weapon systems have been delivered, and they were quite transparent. This government has decided to change that policy because they say it doesn't make sense that Putin and Russia and the Kremlin knows what we deliver and when we deliver it. So yeah, they call it strategic ambiguity, as I learned
Okay.
today. So that's also why Friedrich Merz's answers, he's also framing it in this new strategy of strategic ambiguity, why we haven't learned so much about what this new announcement actually means in practice, how it will play out for now.
But of course, I mean, of course, under Olaf Scholz, there was a big debate about, whether or not Germany would finally deliver some Taurus cruise missiles to
Mhm.
Ukraine, and that never got very far. These
No.
statements from Friedrich Merz really indicate sort of a new position that he's taking and that he's trying to bring Germany on but it's immediately led to a clash with his vice chancellor, Lars Klingbeil, who's also the finance minister, who has said that this is not necessarily a given and that the limits
Mhm.
on the missiles have not been lifted yet. What do you read into sort of this conflict that we're seeing playing out between Chancellor Merz and Vice Chancellor Klingbeil?
Yeah. Well, we know that the SPD, so the junior coalition party to which Klingbeil also belongs, center-left party, is way more hesitant when it comes to providing, yeah, such weapons to Ukraine, for example, or also like, yeah, for example, they are also very worried now. It has become less of an issue because of this reform of the debt brake, but they are always very careful that, for example, help to Ukraine would never cut, for example, social benefits in Germany or something. This is just a line of party thinking that's important to them. Um, yeah, this could very well become a conflict. We have to see how it plays out. Tomorrow is a big day in this sense. I think tomorrow Zelensky is coming to Berlin. There will be a press conference with Merz and Zelensky. So maybe tomorrow we might get some clarity about what the German government is actually doing, what they are actually or what they are not delivering to Kiev. Because for now we actually don't know if that was in Ukraine or not.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so yeah, more to come tomorrow, I guess, on that front.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's a very good point. I mean, Zelensky's visit to Berlin should lead to a little bit more information about some of these policies
Mhm.
and what to expect. We've spent a fair amount of time talking about Friedrich Merz and about the
Mhm.
Christian Democrats, and of course, they are the big partner in this coalition government. But
Mhm.
maybe it makes sense to spend a few minutes talking about Lars Klingbeil and the Social Democrats. I mean, you did just say that they obviously have differences of opinion on a couple
Mhm.
of key areas, but they're also under tremendous pressure as coalition partners to try to make this coalition a success because of the danger that the AfD pose to German politics and concerns that at the next election the AfD
Mhm.
might do even better. Um,
Mhm.
Lars Klingbeil has multiple roles. He's the
Mhm.
vice chancellor, he's the finance minister, he's the party head of the Social Democrats. Can you talk a little bit about sort of what sort of a figure he's making in these early days of the new coalition government?
Mhm. Yeah, so as you said, last Klingbeil really rose to become one of. I mean, he's the most powerful figure now in the Social Democratic Party. There is also Boris Pistorius, the defense minister, who is also quite powerful. He's Germany's most popular politician. So maybe these two men are now the new faces, so to say, of the Social Democratic Party in Germany. It's quite interesting that. So Lars Klingbeil is vice chancellor and finance minister, as you say. Finance minister in Germany is a very important position. Generally, you have a lot of power. You basically have veto over almost all government decisions involving money. So he can really pull the political strings in a way. It's interesting he has so much power because he was already one of the party leaders of the SPD, and the SPD has done like they had a really dramatic election result. So they have really performed. I think they had their worst election result since 1886 or something. So like in over a decade, but still he managed to. His success was the coalition negotiations, where he managed these investments worth billion for Germany's infrastructure, which has been a demand for the SPD to invest in the country to lift the debt brake for many years, and this is something he has been successful at. As a person, he's seen as a quite cool politician in Germany. Like he used to be a member of a rock band. He entered the Bundestag with a piercing. He plays the guitar. He has guitars in his offices. So in this sense, he's also a popular politician. But he has no governing experience, as many ministers in the new cabinet do. Friedrich Merz also has no governing experience, and he needs to lead the finance ministry, which is a very complicated ministry. Like you actually need knowledge to lead the
Yeah.
ministry, which he doesn't have. So once again, this is really going to be like a wait and see moment to see if is he actually up to the task. We saw his first doorstep in Brussels when he went to the European Union, and there he got really tough. I mean, not so tough actually. You could expect the questions, but tough questions from journalists, and we could really see that he didn't have an answer. So he literally told them, "I'm sorry, I just entered into office. I cannot answer the question. I will come back to you in a couple of days," which is fine, of course. I mean, at least he's being honest, but it also shows us that he maybe needs some time to read into, yeah. Um,
Yeah.
but
So
yeah.
obviously, lots to watch in the early days of this government, and that's part of what makes exactly these conversations very, very
Mhm,
interesting for us. But coming back to the international dimension, there are two more themes I'd like to pick up with you. One of them is, of course, a lot of people on both sides of the Atlantic have been wondering when Friedrich Merz will meet with President Donald Trump, and where that meeting will take place. We know the two of them have been in communication by phone. We know that Merz has reached out to Trump before and after visits to Kyiv.
mhm,
But it was just released today that before traveling to Washington himself, he's sending his foreign minister, Joe Vadeful. This
mhm,
is the first time that the Chancellery and the Foreign Office are in the hands of the same party, the CDU,
mhm,
in some 60 years. Um,
mhm.
so Vadeful is traveling to Washington. He'll meet Marco Rubio, U.S. Secretary of State. Have you picked up on any expectations that Germans might have of this trip to Washington by the new German foreign minister?
Yeah, I think one key expectation is for Waterful to kind of prepare the setting for Merz to test the waters with the US administration, to kind of do some preparatory work. You said, as you said, the foreign ministry and the chancellery are in the hands of the same party, which is quite unusual in Germany. And I think this is also a clear sign of Merz just wants to be very aligned with the foreign office. They want to work very closely together, and that's also what we're seeing right now. And then thematically, Waterful today said that he thinks that mainly Ukraine is going to play a huge role, of course, in his conversation with Rubio, and they're gonna discuss how to convince, basically, how to up the pressure on Putin and how to convince him of entering into peace negotiations with Ukraine. He said, of course, as we know, there are many differences between us and the US administration, but the fact that we want to end the war as soon as possible is actually one of the few things where we align. And that
Mhm.
this will therefore also play a huge part in the conversation.
And I guess one of the other things that's probably on the agenda is the tariffs. One of the questions that I had for you coming into our call today is what the German reaction has been to Trump's tariffs against the EU and sort of the on again, off again, announcing these on Friday, then pulling them back, and saying that they wouldn't go into effect until a later date because there are some negotiations going on. You had mentioned earlier that German companies, of course, are concerned about and would be affected
Mhm,
by these tariffs. Can you talk a little bit about the German reaction to the tariffs?
mhm, yeah. So very clearly, Germany is one of the countries within the EU that's, yeah, most hardly hit by such tariffs. It's like it's a big problem also for the incoming government, especially because they promised to revamp the economy. And with these tariffs, it will be much more difficult to do so. We know that Merz has had 4 phone calls up till now with US President Trump, where, of course, tariffs played a huge role in these conversations. We also know that he's very closely aligned with the EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who is also a party member of Merz's Christian Democratic Party. The thing is that in Europe, the trade negotiations or the competence of trade exclusively lays with Brussels. So there is only so much that Berlin or the German government can do. But of course, Germany is the biggest economy in the EU, is the most populous state. So they're in very close contact with the Commission and also with the US administration. we always hear Mert say that we have to be prepared for every scenario, but he doesn't want to escalate this. So he's always very careful. He's among the leaders in the EU who are very careful with formulating threats. He says if it becomes really necessary, I would be prepared to introduce counter-terrorists, but actually I don't want to escalate. During the first weeks of him being in office, he was still saying, I actually hope we can go down to zero. This would be my proposal to the Americans. Now he has kind of stopped saying that, I think, because he has also come to terms with the fact that maybe that's not realistic. Yeah, and then he himself always speaks of this idea, which he says might be as important as tariffs of I don't know how you say this in English, but in Germany it would be the Annäherung der Technologiestandards. So changing the
So,
rules to
yeah, an alignment of technology standards.
yeah. So this is something he wants to propose. He says it seems to be more like his own proposal than a proposal of the Commission. And he also said when he's going to meet Trump, he will bring proposals for each sector to align these standards with him to discuss that because in his opinion, this plays a massive role also in the
Mhm.
conflict.
And then sort of sticking with the foreign policy arena, I think it's important to talk at least briefly about what we're seeing as a shift in policy position vis-a-vis Israel and the situation in Gaza. It seems as if in the
Mhm.
last couple of days, Friedrich Merz has spoken in sort of unusually strong terms
Mhm.
about Israel's offensive in Gaza, and he's spoken in such a tone and tenor that we haven't really heard from a German leader before.
Yeah, exactly. So yesterday we really witnessed a shift in the positioning of the German government. So it was the first time that a German leader stepped out, especially leader of the Conservative Party, to criticize Israel in such strong terms, as you said. Metz basically said, I don't know, like I cannot like Israel can no longer justify in my eyes what it's doing in Gaza with the threat of Hamas, and that he doesn't really understand what the goal of the Israeli military at this point is in Gaza, and that they should be aware that at some point also its best friends cannot support their actions. So this for in German language is very tough. Today there was an event with Waterful where he explained further a bit the position of the German government and how they came to this conclusion. So a lot of it has first of all to do with the threat of starvation, and the insufficient supply of medicine and food in Gaza, and the second is of course the ongoing military course of the Israeli army. And he also explained that he and Merz were in a like over the weekend they basically decided to change course. They were in contact again with the Israeli government. They told them they should change course. Then there was a cabinet meeting in Tel Aviv. Nothing happened, and then they basically decided that okay, we're gonna make this shift, and that's going to happen. At the same time, of course, they always say like supporting Israel is a state of reason for us. We are on the side of Israel, and we also want to use this friendship and this close partnership to talk to the members of the government, and we will keep on doing so. So Waderful also today again said that he really wants to take up this role, for example, to travel to Jordan, to talk to people in the Middle East, and then to try to convince members of the Israeli government to take up peace negotiations again, or yeah, to start a ceasefire. And so they do. I mean, they are still partners and friends of Israel, but they are just openly criticizing them for the first time.
And this is obviously a big change in tone, and we have to see, like so many things, sort of how it plays out in
Mhm.
the weeks and months ahead.
Mhm.
Um, Netta, this has been fantastic. We've covered a lot of ground.
Mhm.
Are there any topics that we've not talked about that you think are worth mentioning before we wrap up?
Maybe one more thing, which I think is interesting, happened last week, and also a broader discussion we're seeing in German media. So last week, five teenagers were arrested.
Yes, the
They were
so-called
between
last wave of defense
the
group.
last wave of defense. Indeed, they were between 14 and 18 years old, and they were arrested because they were members of a right-wing terrorist group, according to the state prosecutors. And they had planned and also executed arson attacks on refugee centers and also on left-wing cultural institutions. And this is, I mean, this really illustrates something that German authorities have been warning for, like just an increase in right-wing extremist violence and also an increase in just being more open to violence, especially among young people. We also hear reports about radicalization in schools, students showing Hitler salutes, and just this whole scene being more professional. So I think this is definitely something which is also going to be a challenge to the new government, of course, also to the security authorities, and something we will also definitely keep an eye on.
Yeah, I mean, this obviously also comes on the heels of another set of arrests for of the citizens of the Reich, right, which was
Mhm.
another group that was banned more recently. I think
Mhm.
what shocked me as I was reading the news about the last wave of defense was how young the people
Yeah.
were who were arrested, right? That it really
Mhm.
was a group of teenagers between the ages of 14 and 18. And that, obviously leads to big concern about domestic radicalization and some of the challenges that the German government is facing at the same time as it's navigating the situation with the AfD
Mhm.
as well.
Indeed. Yes. I couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay. Well, Nette, herzlichen Dank. Thank you so much. This has been such a fascinating and wide-ranging conversation. It goes without saying that we would love to have you back for a future Kaffeepause. But this has been a terrific discussion, and you've given us lots of food for thought when it comes to things that we should be watching when it comes to German politics in the days, weeks, and months ahead.
Yes, thanks so much, and also thanks to the listeners. And I'm happy to come back anytime soon, maybe with more concrete observations and updates on the work of the German government.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. We wish you
Thank
a
you.
wonderful afternoon.
Bye bye. Thank you.